Lesson 24 focuses on percents and the relationship between decimals, fractions, and percents. In this 10 by 10 grid, you can count and see that 35 of the 100 squares are shaded. So if I was to ask, represent the shaded portion as a decimal, we could conclude that each of these is 0.01. or 1/100th, because there are 100 squares. So 35 of those 100 squares are shaded, or 35 hundredths. So we would represent that as 0.35. As a fraction, it's going to be very simple. Well, there's 100 total squares, so 100 is our denominator, and 35 of them are shaded. Now we want to represent that in simplest form, or in the lowest units. And we could realize, oh, they both have a divisor of 5. We could divide each side by 5, which would then equal 7/20. As a percent, it's very simple to go from, this is already as a percent, any number out of 100, per meaning of 100, centi, so it's 35%. And you can see the relationship between 35%, 0.35, and 35/100ths. Second part is going to be representing numbers as percents, decimals, fractions, and ratio. So if we're given 12%, that means 12 per 100, or as you can see when it's written like that, that is 12/100ths, or 12/100ths, so which is 0.12. Once again, we would have 12 out of 100, and we could reduce that. We could divide each side by, well, we could divide each side by 2, and that would give us 6/50, but we can also divide each side by 2 again, and that would give us 3/25. And as a ratio, we can write it however we want. You can write it as 12. 12% means 12 per 100, or at a rate of 12 to 100. You could have written it at a rate of 3 to 25, too. A rate of 3 to 25 would be the same as a rate of 12 to 100. 520%, I wanted to put this up because it might be a little confusing if you see something like that, but don't be. It means the same thing. Percent means per 100, so once again I'm going to write up here, it's 520 per 100, or 520 100ths. So as a whole, if you're thinking about getting it to a decimal form, remember we want to get rid of that denominator. We want to represent it as a unit, at a unit rate without a fraction. So we divide each side by 100. 520 divided by 100 is 5.2. So the decimal form would be 5.2. As a fraction, we could do a lot. 520 to 100, we could divide each side by 10, and that equals 52 to 10. We could divide each side by 2, which would be 26/5. And once again, you could represent it however you want. You could put it right in as 520 to 100 unit rate. 0.35 is a decimal. That's the one we did at the beginning, is 35%. 35/100ths, which we said was 7/20, and 35 to 100. I think you get the general idea of how to do this. If you're given a fraction, to get it to a percent, we got to get that fraction out of 100. So 17 out of 20, to get it to 100, we multiply by 5. 17 times 5 is 85. So it's 85%. As a decimal, that would be 0.85, and as a ratio, that's 85 to 100. As a fraction, if you start with the ratio of 3 to 5, as a fraction, that's very simple. It's just 3/5. As a decimal, you could do to get it as a decimal, instead of getting it out of 100, or we could divide each side by 5, or you could see, okay, that's going to be 6/10, which is 0.6, and which is 60%. To get 3 to 5% out of 100, we multiply by 20. 20 times 3 is 60. So that's going to be a big portion of this lesson as well. And the last part is strategies to solve these types of word problems that you're going to see. I'm going to show you two different methods that you could use. I'm going to write a T-chart on one side, and on the other side I'm going to write a tape diagram, which remember is just unit bar. Tim is buying a DVD player from Deal of the Day. The usual cost of the player is $180. Today's discount is 20%. How much will Tim save? When you start your T-chart, I'm going to put two labels. I'm going to put percent and a dollar value. If possible, you want to find out what 100% is. When the problem tells you what the whole is, that's 100%. That's going to be the first piece of information you want to put in your table. If it tells you the value of a percent, you would put that. In this case, we know the DVD player is $180. That's the whole thing, or 100%. That's the first piece of information you want to put in your table. To get it down to 20%, now we just need to divide by 5. To go from 100 to 20, we could go straight there. Or even simpler, you might not even want to think about that. You might want to say 10%, divide by 10. So it's 18. 20%, I'm just going to write divide by 10. 20% would be then multiplied by 2, which is going to be 36. He's going to save $36. And you could have done 180 divided by 5 as well, and that would be 36. But to me, this step makes it simpler. Going from 100 to 10. And if you know 100%, then you know 10%, you know 1%, and you know any other percent. In a tape diagram, this time we represent the whole, once again, is the whole thing is $180. In a tape diagram, you typically want to divide it into 10 parts. So each one of these is a tenth. Or each one of these is 1/10 or 10%. So we're interested in finding 20%, which would be 2 of those. And it's the same sort of idea. You just put 18, 18. So this gives me 20%, which is $36. Now, the question's also very important because it says how much money will Tim save, which is $36, but it might say how much money will it cost after the discount. If it said that, you'd have to do 180 minus 36. So you'll see questions like that as well.